Hello and welcome to Mooks and Monsters. I'm Rob Ward.
And I'm Tim Niederreiter, and this is episode 96 of the podcast.
And today we're going to be talking about how to make character creation faster. We've all been in situations where we're running a game, and we're about to run a game actually, and we are so excited, and you'll have 2 hours of time to get your 3 players all catched up and ready to go, and then you're going to start gaming. But it ends up taking the entire 3 hours, and you decide to postpone the game for another week. That's what usually happens because, well, character creation takes a lot longer than we expect. Unless you have a group of players that has played in the setting so many times and knows how to, and has books and knows how to roll up a character just like that.
Yeah,
it's going to take a while, especially if you're the only one bringing a book.
That's a really good point. So, the books are a big factor. Having the ability to see all the rules and to look through and build your character. Usually, these are book-based games, of course. So it's that's one of the cool things about the games where they actually have free rules, like Fate. That comes to mind. Fate Core, or any of the Fate games, really. Mm-hmm. The rules are open source, so if you need the core book, it's right there.
Yeah, and it's great. But when you have a game like I'm currently running a Call of Cthulhu game at the moment, and I just had our second round of character creation, and this is what kind of prompted this topic, because it took me a while the first time to get everyone up to speed, and the second time it was a lot easier. So here's how I did it. First thing I did, I took the basic what you need to roll for stats, and instead of having everyone look at the book one at a time, I just jotted all down on a sheet. So for all these stats, roll this. For all these stats, roll this. And just randomly roll.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that saved a lot of time because both people that were creating characters were able to do it fast. The second part, though, with skills and skill points, that's going to take the most time. Mm-hmm. It just always does. Just because there's a lot of math involved. When I was doing the second one, I decided one of my characters needed to do a backstory, and I had a new player there that was needing to create a character from scratch, pretty much. So I was like, well, you know what? Why don't you do the backstory too? That is where I found the idea. That is where I found the key. Because that way the character is defined. And it'd be easier to understand where you want to put your skills.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense. Instead of just gaming it and making well, I want these skills, so I'll come up with a justification for them later. You decide who the character is, and they would have these skills, so you know where to put the skill points.
Mm-hmm. Because if your backstory is in Call of Cthulhu, you have the option to roll your backstory, and if it's totally different, then you might have to go back and change your points around. This way, you can just have everything set up to go. So that's what I did.
Yeah, that's a clever hack.
The funny thing is, I actually had a guy call in. One of my players was driving down to Kansas, and he wanted to create a character. So essentially what I did is that I asked him, I didn't ask him about the minutia. I asked him, okay, what type of character you want to play? And he gave me what type of character. So, and it's all we started with backstory first. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, so you want this person to be kind of this person. And from the backstory, I was able to allocate, just because Call of Cthulhu also has quick start rules.
Mm-hmm.
If you just want to whip out something really quick, you just assign them 80, 70, 60, 60, 50, 50, 50, 40.
Right.
For the stats. Yeah. And it really worked for him because he's driving down. He's in a car, so he can't really do math. So he just told me what he wanted, and I just filled in all the details. So
right.
now he has a character.
Yeah.
He didn't have to roll the dice once.
Yeah.
I pretty much asked him, do you think they would have a gun? Do you think they would be this type of person to that part? And it worked so much better. So I'd say my first hack for making character creation faster is get the idea of the character down first. And from the person, like who this character is at the core, that will lead you into your occupation. And from that occupation, then they can lead into the skills and all that stuff. It just made it a lot more faster because that way people don't have to decide like, well, I'm not really so good in this, so I might as well I'm not going to be that, even though my character totally wants to be.
Yeah. Also, you won't fill up on time by you won't waste time having to go back, right? You won't because you already have the core concept. Doing the concept after you make the stats is kind of a pitfall of a lot of character creation systems. On the other hand,
it is totally.
Yeah. On the other hand, certain systems and it kind of originates from like Dungeons and Dragons, where if you roll stats and you don't, especially if you roll it in order like you do in traditional games, like way back in the day, the original D&D. If you roll all your statistics and put them in order that you rolled them, you wouldn't be able to play certain kinds of character very well. You couldn't be a wizard with a 10 intelligence. That just isn't going to work. So that's why you'd have to choose your class after that point. However, it makes sense to choose your class first, and it's kind of similar to choosing your backstory first in more modern versions of D&D. So that can work that way too. But I do like the idea, the concept even better. Using the concept as a guide is really, I think it's really effective. Like, would your character be able to do this? No, then don't bother putting skill points in that thing.
Yeah, and sometimes just taking a break between the mechanics and the rest of the story, because the character that had to totally roll up from new, actually, he didn't have to go from pure scratch. We rolled out his skills already. So he was high in strength, low in constitution, high in appearance, low in size. So from there, he had a couple of options of what to do. He ended up being a sex worker. And
okay.
But it's going to work perfectly for the setting too.
Okay.
Secondary to that, though, is as a GM, make sure everyone's up to speed on what the type of story is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because at the very bottom of this sheet that I printed out, I had, at the top I said, this is the setting. At the bottom, here's some suggested ideas for what you want to be. You can either be in this career, this type of career, or you have a hobby that's this. That way you have enough room that you're not infringing on character autonomy, but you're not going to have a problem getting the party together.
Absolutely. And I think the big one of the other things I've heard is a technique to make character creation kind of simpler, and this can make it faster. I think it's to make have each player pick an ability or a skill or whatever, depends on the game, that they're going to be the best at in that game. I remember I heard about, and then nobody. It's kind of like if you look at Amber Dice List, it's kind of like the stat lottery in that. But everyone just gets to pick one thing that they get to be the best at. You all agree on this stuff, and then nobody can pick nobody's stat or skill in that can be higher than the character who picked it. And so that's a way to, and it's interesting. It's not really exactly what we're talking about. So, but I just thought it bore mentioning.
No, it definitely does help though, because you say, from like, what do you want your character? I don't know. If you have something like that, like I want to be very good at doing this, then okay, so we're gonna need, like the character that was the guy that was driving down to Kansas. he said that he wants his character to be very good at persuasion.
Okay.
So I put a lot of points for him. I put a lot of points in that for him. I put a lot of points in like fast talk and similar things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And also that can really help if your players are new to the game or they don't know the rules well. So, you know, if you run into a game, I mean, I love to run different systems, but if you run a bunch of different systems, you're always teaching somebody the rules for the first time when you make characters.
Oh, absolutely.
And that can really slow things down. But it also can. But if you just talk to them in terms of this is not in terms of the rules, and that's actually kind of the key thing to a lot of these things. Are like focus on the story, not the rules. It's easier this way. And it's because everyone can understand the story better. Generally, if you're playing one of these games, pretty much everybody understands the story better than they understand the math behind the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least a lot of people are going to.
Well, it really is. That's always been my philosophy as a GM. I'm very, like I told my players straight up, look, I'm not a mechanical GM. I'm very much a role playing heavy GM, and because quite a few of the players were happy to hear that because one of them admitted to me that she likes to use improvised weapons and do stupid stuff. So it's good to have that camaraderie with your players because that way I'm able to be like, okay, I know I'm going to expect that from her. I'm going to look up the improvised weapons rules in Call of Cthulhu and make sure that gets settled. But it seems like most of them just kind of like to talk and get out of the way. So I can rely. I know like what the NPCs are going to be doing most of the time. They're going to be like, "Wait, what are you doing? What you up to?"
Yeah. It helps you orient. It helps you decide what the game's about, and then you can focus on the stuff that's important to the game when making the characters. For example, I'm not sure if we decided this when we just started out, but no, I think we did. But when we started out that the now podcast semi-famous Rhesus hack game that we played, right? That game we did. Those rules are incredibly simple, so character creation was quite swift. However, one of the biggest things that holds people back in a rules light system is just the number of choices you have to make sometimes. Easier in Rhesus hack. Also easier in Rhesus hack, though, if I do say so myself, because there's very few choices. You decide like 5 or 6 things. And then and plus aspects, which I guess is like 5 or 6 more things. So maybe 10 total choices. Still kind of a lot. I mean, I think that's actually quite a few. And since nothing's randomly generated, where we didn't do so at that point, you couldn't just decide, oh, I'm going to roll the dice and I guess I'm a starship captain or something. We didn't do that. But the Baron started off, okay, he's the head of his house, right? If I recall, that was how he started it. Like you're the wealthiest man in the galaxy. That's the kind of decision that once you made it, it informs everything else about the character. And that kind of thing is incredibly useful. If you don't have like and it just goes back to the concept. We talked about that before. It's a guidepost that lets you just set everything else up. And I think it helps you make the rest of your decisions, as opposed to something like and actually here's another good example of that. It's mechanics, not stories. So it's a little different. But in Dungeons and Dragons, you decide what kind of weapon your fighter wants to wield. You know, is he going to use a bow mostly? Is he going to use a sword and a shield? Is he going to use a two-handed weapon? You know, these choices, like then it's going to determine what feats you take and stuff like that. So then it really narrows it down. It's like, okay, there's 100 feats in D&D or in Pathfinder, but you really only need to worry about one of them when you start out. You know. Or 2, maybe.
Yeah, and I would say that another thing is getting on a meta level because my campaign, I have a lot of the people that are playing with me are fellow actors or theater people. So I know that, and summer's busy, so I know some of them will not be able to be there all the time. With that said, that way I know 2 things. One, this can't be. I can't have a character that this entire story revolves around them. 2, I need to put this in a place where, people can come and go. So I've set the setting in a resort town. So if people need to duck out, they can, spend a week they're out of town. They can go back home,
Mm-hmm.
but then they can come right back.
Nice. That's
Yeah,
elegant.
and I'd say, and there's nothing that's no one has created a character that's tied to the place. The one that is closest to being tied down works very close to the setting, but he's an acrobat, so he might be on tour one time.
Right.
If
That's a
he's
really
gone for a
good
while,
consideration. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh no, totally. It's just making sure that none of them are like the mayor of the town,
Yeah, yeah.
or there's quite a few people that are migratory in it, and like I said, okay, so the resort I sent it in was in Wisconsin Dells,
Okay.
and if you're familiar with Wisconsin Dells, that's just like a big place where during the summer a lot of people from Chicago and uh, Minnesota, Michigan, other parts of Wisconsin like to go and spend a weekend, enjoy the water parks there, and then come back home. So I know that these people need to be able to come up and get into the plot and then go away sometimes if they want to. But if they, if these are characters that stay longer, then they'll have the option to stay on vacation.
Yeah, well, that really works. I think that's a great idea. And like I said, that's a great way to do consideration. And as far as character creation goes, you're thinking almost a step ahead of most GMs, I think. Whereas most GMs are like, especially me. I mean, I partially because I've been had to run with so few people lately. At least when I'm running games in person, it's hard for me to make a game where I'm like, because I'm not going to run with two people, only two players. That's just too few players, right? I think generally
Sometimes,
two is too.
yeah.
Well, I definitely won't run again with one player in person. That seems kind of silly to me. It
Yeah,
also makes most of my players a little uncomfortable. So,
absolutely.
So I guess my point is it's more challenging and less rewarding to run a game with only one PC. However, if it's also tough to run, and I only had 3 players in my last game, but I never got to the point where I was thinking, is this character going to be around very often? Right? I didn't get that far, and I think it's a very useful thing to think about, like how characters, more than just their stats, right? It's like, who is this person in the world is worth thinking about. But that's not exactly going to speed things up, except that sometimes it does. That's the thing. It's counterintuitive. You're going to learn, you have additional information that will tell you what you need to know, and then you can build the character based on that, and it can really speed things up. So I talked around that a little bit, but I really think it's very helpful. Your idea is super.
Yeah, and I know we're kind of getting a little off topic of, I put us off topic of character creation and making that faster. But these are things you need to consider. Like, these are the stats where these characters cannot reach. We are. This is going to be very combat heavy. Thus, these characters are not going to be people that are 13th warriors. Um, just things like that, just deduction. Like,
yeah,
I know that these characters will be doing this, so they won't be doing that.
absolutely.
Also, when you have a system like Call of Cthulhu, where you're very, what is it? Squishy?
Yeah, easily to killed is what I think of it. But yeah.
Yeah, when you have someone with only like 10 hit points,
and the monster does 2d6 damage. Yeah, at least.
Yeah, so you have there's a good reason that there's a possibility that someone's not going to make it. And that as shit goes on, well, there's only so much that can happen. So I'm also taking the assumption that maybe one of my characters would die.
Yeah.
And thus, like, I created like several non-player characters that a player might want to take up and continue on the story with them, or create another character and
Yeah.
See
Well,
if
and then
they
with a
can
resort town, it makes so much sense because people are going to be coming in there. They'll be new to the place fairly often.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a great setting for a game of horror, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. It took me a while to kind of like figure it out, like where it should be, and I thought like Wisconsin Dells was the perfect place. Or yeah, or I mean, it could be like someplace like Vegas, or if you have a militaristic setting, it's a base, and maybe there's maybe you're by the border, and maybe more reinforcements are being sent to the front.
Right.
Or if you're in a city, or if you are very deeply character driven, and you have really deep, player focused games, and one of those players goes away, we know enough about the family to know which one of the siblings will come up, or if the parent or the son or the daughter is going to come up and take their fallen parents' shield.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great also, or like you're all part of the same. I mean, being part of a chain of command, or in a in a political game, you could all be different levels of official, that kind of thing. There's a lot of room for that kind of unifying theme, and that theme can really speed up character creation. Another, actually in the Spycraft core rulebook, the Spycraft 2.0 core rulebook.
Mm-hmm.
This is a game where it's actually, I've been learning a lot about this game, and it's actually not as bad. It's not as complicated as I thought it would be to design characters for it. However, it's still pretty complicated as far as a game to play. But anyway, one of the things that's interesting is in their setting descriptions in the back of the book, they have alternative settings to the espionage that they kind of assume you'll be doing. But
interesting.
The alternative like genres, I think, is how they describe them. So they have horror, they have near future science fiction, cyberpunk type stuff. They have a bunch of them. And one of the things that they describe in these is they have a list of the classes, because this is a game that's like Dungeons and Dragons, so it has different classes that appear in the book, but it has a list of different classes that make sense in that genre. So you don't have to use all the classes if you don't want to, or you can basically say these are the classes that make the most sense. So you should pick from this list instead of picking from the list of all of them. Does that make sense? I thought that was pretty cool. So you're not going to play a lot of combat heavy classes. You'll be more likely a snoop or a sleuth in a horror game, whereas you might be a soldier or a face man in an espionage game. So,
I totally am a big proponent of that, knowing which classes are not going to be the ones that are chosen.
Yeah, narrow the choices, and that's the thing. That's the thing I really want to get at here, if you don't mind.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Is that the choices? Making choices in character creation is the fun part of character creation, but it's the part that's also the most time consuming. Generally, the math can be difficult for some people, but it generally doesn't take that long. It's just like, okay, once you know it, I mean, granted, deducting skill points when you have 150 skill points can take a long time. That's fair, or even 300 skill points, you can have a lot in certain games. However, I think the bigger challenge is just like look at Fate Core. There are almost no choosing the skills in Fate Core is actually the easy part. Choosing the aspects is the part that takes forever for a lot of people, because there's all these different, because you have maybe only 4 or 5 of them, but you're kind of trying to craft a cunning or witty character, and that can take a long time if you're not up for it immediately. Like you're trying to say, like, okay, like you're trying to find the perfect high concept aspect that could really slow you down. But if you're a good high concept, that's more like knowing who your character is right off the bat, So kind of encouraging the players to think about their characters before the game starts is really useful. I think that's it. Before you get to the character creation stage, you're like, you have an idea of what you want to play, you have an idea of what the game is going to be like, and that basically is just a summary of what we've already talked about. So.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of that's what I like to. I love it when a player comes in and says, "Hey, I know exactly what I want."
Yes.
And even if they don't know what they want, they're like, "All right, I'm ready to roll for just pretty much everything and just see where the dice lay."
Yeah, either way is great. Though, and again, in certain games like Mutants and Masterminds, you have to make all the decisions. There's no random generation in that, and that's one of the things that makes it so slow. But actually, my last Mutants and Masterminds game, one of my players did come in and he said, "I know exactly what I want to do." And what he wanted to do was very unusual, and it was super fun. So it's a cool. It's always a great experience to have like players that invested already or that interested that they have an idea of what they want to do. So.
Oh hell yeah!
All right. Yeah.
Well,
anything else about character
running a little low
yeah.
on time, but I would say there's the way that character creation does not need to be a big slog. Like it definitely helps when you have the idea of what you want to be, or if you define who the person is first and then what they do afterwards.
Right. Yeah. Make the big creative decision first, and it will inform everything else.
Precisely.
So, yeah. All right. That about does
this has been a Mooks and this has been a Mooks and Monsters. You can find us on mentalcellarpublications.com. You can email us at podcast@mentalcellarpublications.com. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at StayChat. Tim's at TNeedleRider. He's got a lot more followers than I do. You can like us on Facebook and find this podcast wherever podcasts can be found.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Take it easy.